This video is going to be tumultuous. Welcome back, Book Dragons. It is time for another book review blast. And I'm going to be talking about 4 books with you today. And I'll tell you which ones they are right up front. So then if you are wanting to skip to a certain part of the video to see one of the books over the other, you can do that. So I am going to be doing quick reviews today of The Man in the Brown Suit and Sparkling Cyanide, both by Agatha Christie, and Shadows of Self, which is Mistborn Era 2, Book 2, and American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. So, here we go. Without any further ado, let's start off talking about The Man in the Brown Suit. And I'm going to put my eyes on, because I did make a few notes just in case I need to reference them during the video. So The Man in the Brown Suit is the first of what are labeled the Colonel Race novels. Colonel Race is a contemporary of Hercule Poirot, but this is not a Poirot novel. This is just a standalone Agatha Christie novel. It doesn't feature any of her typical detectives. And this is a mystery novel told from the first-person perspective of our main character, Anne Bedingfield. She witnesses a murder on the tube, or the train if you don't know what the tube refers to. And when she runs over to try and help the person who has just been accosted to see if they're still alive, of course they're dead, and she finds a scrap of paper in that person's pocket that leads her on a chase to solve a mystery that takes place in various different locations like London, South Africa, a number of different places. And she's just this amateur sleuth, pretty unknown, pretty unsuspecting. And even though along the way she may get into some pretty tight spots, she begins to unravel clues to the mystery that will eventually lead her to the perpetrator. It's a pretty typical Agatha Christie setup. Lots of different red herrings throughout the story that here you think it's one person, and then all of a sudden it might be someone else, and along the way you're just trying to guess who the murderer might be. And if you're like me, at the end of the book, you got everything wrong, or at least you got most things wrong. This was a pretty good book. I did find myself somewhat bored at times. It was just kind of moving along really, really slowly. It took a lot of time to build up to where things were actually getting interesting. I would say probably about 30-40% into the book is where it really started to pick up. And I was kind of bummed by that, but overall it was a fun story, and I definitely recommend that anybody would read it. I would say for this book it goes in my shiny tier. And so the second book that I'm talking about today is Sparkling Cyanide, also by Agatha Christie. And this originally went under the title of Remembered Death, because essentially what's happening is 7 people got together for dinner, and one of the people at that dinner, Rosemary Barton, ends up dying, apparently by suicide. And so her husband, George, has a lot of memories of her and is really distraught by her death. And the whole plot of the story forms out of remembering her death. And so that's why it was originally titled that. But I think they probably changed the name because it's more catchy and it fits more with the method of death, which was cyanide. And that's not a spoiler because that's talked about immediately toward the beginning of the book. And it's more about finding out how she came to possess that cyanide. And so after this event, her husband George is bound and determined to solve the mystery of her murder because he is convinced that it was not suicide, that it was murder. And there are various different players in this story, and each one of them has a motive that is established early on by Agatha Christie. And I really love the way she constructed this story, because at the very beginning of the book, you got different point of view chapters that talk about the different potential suspects. So you got Rose's sister Iris, and you got Stephen and Alexandra Faraday, and you got George's assistant Ruth Lessing, and you got George's nephew Victor Drake. And there are other players in the story too, such as the waiter at the restaurant that they had gone to when the suicide/murder happened. And George even goes one step further to set the stage for a reenactment of that dinner, so to speak, where he is convinced that he is going to be able to name the killer at that reenactment dinner. So it's just this really super well constructed plot. I was just fascinated the whole time reading it. And of course, because there have been all the POV chapters at the beginning of the book, pretty much everybody is a suspect, and as the genius writer that she is, it is very hard, if not impossible, to solve the mystery yourself until you get to the end and everything is revealed. It's just brilliant. This is another Colonel Race novel, and he does actually pop up a little bit more in this book, but still not as much as I thought he might, for this being supposedly one of his feature novels. But I just loved all the twists and turns in this book. I highly, highly recommend Sparkling Cyanide, and I put this in my hoard. The next book I'm going to talk about is Shadows of Self by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2 in Mistborn Era 2, also known as the Wax and Wayne novels. So, of course, the two main characters are Lord Waxillian Ladrian and his friend Wayne, and they are trying to keep the city of Ellendale together in the wake of a power play by a rogue Khandra. Now, if you're not familiar with what a Khandra is, they are one of the beings that popped up in the original Mistborn trilogy. And I won't spoil a whole lot for you, but I will just say that Khandra can take the form of anyone or anything. All they need to do is eat the remains of that person and then embed that person's bones into their form, and they can take on the characteristics of pretty much anyone or even anything like animals and things like that. So they are one of the original creations of the original Hero of Ages, and now one of them has gone rogue. And that's all I'm going to say on that. But it's just a really, really fun story. It's just as good as the first book, Alloy of Law. I loved Alloy of Law so much that I had to give it top marks. It was such a great story. And this book is no different. It just continues the trend. I was just blown away by how fun this book is, how action-packed it is. The pacing is phenomenal. The witty banter between Wax and Wayne and other characters within the world, I thought was just fantastic. So I highly recommend Mistborn Era 2 to anyone. It's just a really fantastic read. It's a quick read as well. I mean, this was, I believe it was like a 500-page book or so, and I read it so quickly, like 5-6 days. It went really quick, and I highly, highly recommend it. This one goes in my soaring tier. And then the final book on this list is literally one of the worst books I have ever read. And that would be American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. This book was a gift to me from my son. He knew I liked thriller novels, and he thought I might enjoy this. This book is a satirical look at 1980s yuppie culture, told from the first-person perspective of Patrick Bateman. Patrick Bateman is a Wall Street trader in New York City, and this book serves as just a day-in-the-life account of everything Patrick Bateman does on a day-to-day basis. It might be giving long essays on some of his favorite musical artists. It may be talking trash about his coworkers or women that he's taken home, or long drawn out lists of name brand companies. I think that was one of the more annoying aspects of this book. Is I constantly felt like I was being bombarded by commercials for all the name brand clothing that he likes and colognes that he likes and beauty products that he buys. So you got stuff like Armani and Clinique showing up in here for some of the products he buys and stuff like that. This book shows in painstaking detail the kind of person that Patrick Bateman is. He's a pretentious narcissist and perfectionist. He's horrifically racist and extremely misogynist. Women are toys for him. He doesn't even remember their names half the time or anything. This is just a day-to-day account of a really despicable person. I mean, this is a guy that gets off on documentaries about death and serial killers. And he is a serial killer. At least in his mind. It's pretty clear throughout the book that he has committed some murders. But whether or not he has encountered as many murders as he claims to have committed is kind of up for debate. Because as the story progresses, it's very clear that Patrick Bateman is slowly breaking with reality. He's slowly descending into madness. It's hard to tell sometimes how reliable of a narrator he is. But this book was just a piece of work. It's on several banned book lists, and I can see why. I don't approve of banning books, and I will always read a banned book, or at least give it a shot. I like to read banned books, but I can see why it was banned. And the author was accused, as a result of writing this book, of being a sadist, and I can see why. This book pulled no punches. Talk about trigger warnings. There is graphic sexual content in this book, and I do mean graphic. I would say X-rated sexual content. Not that that's a bad thing, but I'm just letting you know. And what made that particularly disturbing was the sexual brutality and the sexual torture in the book. There are also 3 instances that I counted anyway of animal torture and abuse. 2 instances we got to watch him do it, and 1 instance he just talked about in the background after having already done it, but he didn't, it didn't show him actually in the middle of the animal torture, but the other 2, it did. You got a full bird's eye view of the animals he was torturing, and he liked it. And that almost made me just completely DNF the book. That really pissed me off. I was just like, I don't know if I want to continue. Looking back, I probably should have DNF'd the book. And there is heavy, heavy racism and xenophobia in the book as well. So I just wanted to lay that out for you guys, some of those trigger warnings. And I will say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I would not recommend this book to anyone. If you like extreme horror thrillers, I get why you would read this book. And if you want to read this book, I'm not going to stop you. But I would not recommend this to anyone, honestly. I have never, in the history of my booktube career, put a book in my lowest tier. My lowest tier is the burn category. And while I would never actually burn a book, this book might come close to deserving it. But I know there's a lot of people who love this book. A lot of people love the movie as well with Christian Bale. And I love Christian Bale. I probably wouldn't watch the movie, but I do like Christian Bale. So a lot of people love it. I'm not going to say that there's no one out there who would be happy they read this book, but I just can't think of any reason to recommend it. Okay? So, I think that's it, guys. That is the end of my book review blast. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Have you read any of these 4 books? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, make sure you are reading more books I'll talk with you soon.